March 1953. Joseph Stalin, supreme dictator of all the Russians, aged 73, was stricken by a cerebral hemorrhage and died at the Kremlin in Moscow, ending the career of one of the most complex, powerful, and controversial figures in world history. 18 days later in London, Mary, Queen Consort of George V and grandmother of Queen Elizabeth, passed on at the age of 86. The personification of Victorian dignity and discipline, she had never made a speech in public and never used a telephone. A nation mourned her death. Two surviving sons, the Duke of Windsor and the Duke of Gloucester, headed the funeral procession to Westminster Abbey. Only a few months later followed the coronation of her granddaughter, with contingents of servicemen from all corners of the British Commonwealth converging on London for the ceremony. Lord Louis Mountbatten made a ceremonial arrival on the flight deck of the carrier Sydney when it called at Malta. And then on to Portsmouth, where the Australian High Commissioner, Sir Thomas White, welcomed the visitors, including 5 VC winners, 4 from Australia and 1 New Zealander. And soldiers, sailors and airmen from the Dominions stepped proudly past Nelson's flagship, Victory. These men formed portion of a procession of 40,000 following the coronation in the Abbey on the 4th of June. A scene of dazzling pageantry which only the British can present. And for the first time, Elizabeth II wore the emblem which epitomizes the monarchy in the eyes of the world, the crown of St. Edward. Half a million lined the streets of Sydney for the 2-hour procession of the Roman Catholic National Eucharistic Congress. 20,000 marchers, 40 different national groups, an historic occasion coinciding with the 150th anniversary of the first public mass in Australia. In the federal capital, the flags of Australia and the United States provided a backdrop for the proposed U.S. memorial organized by the Australian-American Association. Cadets from nearby Duntroon Military College provided the Guard of Honor as Prime Minister Menzies received the Governor-General, Sir William McKell. Sir William unveiled a plaque on the site of the now famous 250-foot memorial column, then only in the blueprint stage. An American visitor by special VIP plane, Vice President Richard Nixon, then the highest-ranking American ever to visit Australia, here with his wife to look over the scene down under, and welcomed on his arrival in Sydney by the Premier of New South Wales, the Honourable R.J. Heffron. British Minister for Supply Duncan Sands, on the way to Canberra for atomic research talks, met his Australian counterpart at Mascot, Howard Beale.
As the Minister in the United Kingdom responsible for the supply of equipment for our forces, I'm of course enormously looking forward to seeing something myself of the magnificent contribution which Australia is making in the field of industry and science to the defense of the free world. And of course, apart from seeing your defense factories and uranium mines, I'm especially impatient to go out to the great Woomera range, about which I've heard so much.
And at the weapons research range at Woomera, the thick blanket of secrecy was lifted for the first time from the Australian-designed pilotless jet plane, the Jindovic, a target for testing guided missiles. Missiles used in hunting down supersonic enemy aircraft. Jindovic, the Aboriginal name for a carrier of weapons. Under remote control on this, its first public appearance, and throttled back to a mere 650 miles per hour. 400 miles north, on the fringe of the arid Simpson Desert, the isolated township of Birdsville, an oasis in one of the most forbidding areas of Australia. A gala day to celebrate the opening of a new hospital, replacing one destroyed by fire 2 years before, and re-establishing a base for the Flying Doctor. And while on his aerial errands of mercy, the locals, that is, anyone who lived within a couple of 100 miles, turned to the racecourse, fielding on the only race of the day, and with one lonely bookie. A 3-horse affair. No stewards, of course, and you could hardly expect the jockeys to sport silks. But at Flemington on Melbourne Cup Day, all the trimmings, with jockeys not the only ones in colourful silks among the crowd of 85,000 jamming the famous course. After Carioca had been scratched, the Sydney horse Hydrogen became a 4-1 favourite. But Wadala at 14-1 came to the rescue of the bookies to give owner, breeder and Victorian Racing Club Vice Chairman Mr. Underwood his first cup in 47 years racing and a $28,000 prize. Most Regal was second and My Hero filled third place. For Jack Purtell, it was his second triumph in the famous race. He'd won on Hiraji in 1947. More than 8,000 golf fans watched Kilnagle quickly emerge as Australia's hope in the closing stages of the McWilliams Open. Many overseas stars studded the field. After holding off a sustained challenge by the Argentinian Roberto Di Vincenzo, Kell took out top money with a record-breaking 11 under par total for the 4 rounds. This win established him on the rich European and American circuits and led to the winning of golf's ultimate, the British Open. On the other side of the world, another thrilling finish. At Carnoustie in Scotland, no fewer than 4 tied for second place in the British Open, including Australia's Peter Thomson. But the crowd turned their attention to the courageous American Ben Hogan, whose first 3 rounds totaled 214. Last year's holder, South African Bobby Locke, was out of the running. Here on the 72nd hole, Hogan missed this putt for a 67. Now, if that gentleman would move, we could see Hogan's last putt for a 68, and a total of 282 and victory. Ben Hogan, the man who refused to be a cripple. Hogan was the victim of a car accident, but these fellas couldn't hurt themselves, even when they deliberately set out to flirt with death. It takes all sorts to make a world, but there are only a crazy few who are willing to tempt fate this way. And if you can't manage to fall, chase the crowd. But this crowd is not eccentric, as many have classified Percy Cerutty, Melbourne's trainer of athletes, here seen at the age of 53 putting pupils through their paces. If his reputation rested only on public antics, it'd be hard to take him seriously. But Cerutty has a record of notable achievements, training John Landy and Herb Elliott through their careers, and for a time to develop the killer instinct, he took world boxing champion Jimmy Carruthers in hand. On November 13th at the Sydney Sports Ground, 35,000 boxing fans gathered to see Carruthers defend his world bantamweight title against the American challenger Patty Galt. Jimmy had taken the title from South African Vic Tawil with a first-round knockout and had flattened him in 10 in a return. The Sydney crowd, who paid $140,000, were looking for another KO win from their hero, the first Australian to hold a world title. A clash of heads in the first and third rounds opened a deep gash over Jimmy's right eye, which forced him to exercise the greatest caution. He maintained a blaze of lefts to Galt's head, intermingled with slashing uppercuts and rips. A clear-cut points victory for Carruthers, a triumph of speed and power. After beating America 4 matches to 1 in Adelaide a year previously, our Davis Cup team of Hode, Rosewell and Rex Hartwig were all set to repeat the dose on Melbourne's Kooyong courts. But it was not to be so easy. Lou Hode had already downed Vic Satius in straight sets, with Tony Trabert treating Ken Rosewell likewise. America went on to win the doubles the following day, but all was not yet lost. Lou Hode gave one of his most brilliant displays to beat Trabert in a grueling 2.5-hour 5-setter, winning the 5th 7-5 and setting the score at a crucial 2 matches all. It was now 19-year-old Ken Rosewell's turn. In masterly fashion, Rosewall defeated Seychelles in 4 sets. In presenting the trophy to the Australians, the governor of Victoria, Sir Dallas Brooks, said, "Yesterday will go down in tennis history as Hode's Day. Today will be known as Rosewall's Day. The last day of 1953. The Himalayas, grim, inhospitable, forbidding, and the greatest of the mighty snow-capped chain, Everest herself, a 29,000 feet permanent challenge to the adventurous spirit of man, conquered for the first time by a tall, wiry New Zealand beekeeper, Edmund Hillary and his Nepalese Sherpa Tenzing Norgay, the Tiger of Tigers, as he is named by his countrymen. Edmund Hillary, the first man to climb onto the roof of the world. Freedom Village in Korea and its Anzac Day 1953 and the first exchange of prisoners of war. General Clark, American commander, welcomes the first batch of 684 United Nations troops swapped for 5,800 communists at Panmunjom. And for the Australians, it's home James and don't spare the horsepower. At Mascot, crowds gathered to welcome the boys. Private John McKay of West Australia had a smashed arm but felt more like his old self with a new slouch hat. For Private Eric Donnelly, it was an emotional reunion with his mother and fiancé. In Brisbane, the line of New Australia arrived with 750 men of the 1st Battalion, veterans of one of the strangest and fiercest wars of modern times. Some of the men married while overseas, and the passenger list included 39 Japanese brides and their babies, eager to catch a first glimpse of their new homeland. A romance which began at the Olympic Games in Helsinki reached a happy climax at Lithgow in western New South Wales when Marjorie Jackson married South Australian cyclist Peter Nelson at St Paul's Church. It was the second time within a few months that the Lithgow populace had turned out to cheer their famous daughter, who'd brought back 2 gold medals and 2 world records for the sprint double. Greenmount Beach, Coolangatta, for a different ceremony. Holidaymakers, and possibly some honeymooners, were introduced to the Hokey Pokey, a new song and dance craze led by Al and Doug Rotten. And it was wah-wah in Sydney when the lunch hour crowds were treated to a preview of the knee view, the latest decree of French fashion leader Christian Dior. A cheeky rise in hems caused a rise in eyebrows and temperatures, especially with the boys. One way of reminding the window cleaner to keep his window cleaner. A worm's eye view as each skirt passes. But Fred missed out. He had no glasses. But we needed no glasses to watch fashion-conscious Reggie from Taronga Park come into the local barber shop for a short back and sides. Well, I'll be a monkey's uncle, says the barber, as Reggie tries to give him a run for his money on the horses and some local gossip. The fellas stick around to see how Reggie's crew cut gets on, but he's not too happy after being a surfie for so long. Ah, now for a shave. It's open slather on the lather. Hey, don't eat the soap, you dope. I guess this is what you call putting an edge on an appetite. A hot towel and spray, sir? Reggie says, give us the works, the waterworks. The rest of the crew scram. Why? 'Cause monkeys is the craziest peoples. How's this for a man-eater? These shots were taken in South Australian waters off Kangaroo Island, a mecca for big game fishermen and home of the hungriest and most daring sharks in the sea, known as White Death. The monsters can't resist the tempting bait of a couple of 100 pounds of meat, and to check table manners, the cameraman grinds away within 2 feet of the best set of dentures you'd never want to brush. There goes the bait, and it doesn't touch the sides, but the hook did, and the 1,200-pounder was on the losing end of a stout line. After a 47-minute fight and a few well-chosen words, it was curtains for the man-eater. Across the Pacific, the Shore Savile liner Gothic, chartered as the Royal Yacht, was bringing Queen Elizabeth and the Duke of Edinburgh on tour, escorted by the cruiser HMS Sheffield. The Queen made her own film record of the trip. A highlight, the line-crossing ceremony, when Lady Pamela Mountbatten was initiated by the Duke. A thoroughly wet but enjoyable time for all, with the Queen watching the proceedings and the Duke, who played a leading part, enjoying the occasion as much as anyone. At Suva, smartly turned out gun crews fired a 21-gun salute as their Majesties landed on Fijian soil. And it was the biggest moment of this tiny tot's young life as she carried out with extraordinary aplomb the task of presenting to the Queen a bouquet of frangipani and orchids. Just watch this curtsy. And then to Tonga to repay the visit by Queen Saloti to the coronation. A fabulous feast, prepared and eaten according to the island customs. A sucking pig fit for a queen. Next port of call for the Gothic was Auckland, where the royal couple stepped ashore to begin a tour of the Dominion. Disregarding the uncertain weather, Her Majesty wore a summer dress when she was greeted by the Governor-General, Sir Willoughby, and Lady Norrie. But within a few days, an unscheduled catastrophe was to cast a shadow of gloom over the visit. This was the scene of death on New Zealand's saddest ever Christmas Day. The previous night, 166 people died when tragedy struck an express train carrying holidaymakers from Wellington to Auckland. Water bursting out of a crater lake on Mount Ruapehu had washed away the foundations of a bridge. The locomotive and 6 of 9 carriages spilled into the raging torrent. Several families were wiped out and many bodies were not recovered for weeks. The Dominion tour went on as scheduled, and the royal couple were treated to the colourful spectacle of Maori ceremonial dances. Queen Elizabeth was presented with a hand-woven cape, and then Maori women went through their striking and melodious song and paddle routine, Canoe Poi. artist with two brains, Mrs. Vera Schindler of Woodville, South Australia, showed just what can be done if you keep your minds on the job. When she wrote upside down and backwards, the result was a lot better than most of us can do normally. Left and right hands work independently and in opposite directions. A handy attribute if you're planning an exhibition. You could double your output. And remember, she's working upside down, just to make it harder. Reversible boards and hinged frames complete the job for Mrs. Schindler, whose double vision doesn't worry her in the slightest. Another two-handed art, boomerangs. One to fashion the implement with glass and sandpaper, and the other to throw it. With the approach of the royal visit, the Aboriginals of the Sydney suburb of La Perouse were busy turning out the curved weapons in anticipation of a boom in boomerang souvenir sales. And at the same time, Bob Sim polished up his throwing technique. Amazing, isn't it? He just can't get rid of the thing. It's a wristy knack, just as necessary in the back-breaking job of shearing. In 1892, the record of 321 merinos in 8 hours 40 minutes was set in central Queensland by one Jack Howe, a hand shears record that still stands. But at Palmerston North in New Zealand, Godfrey Bowen, who sheared only as a hobby, set a new world mark by machine clipping 456 Romney crossbreds in 9 hours. Nice going, Bowen. At the Victorian town of Kyabram, our camera focused on a crazy example of mechanized madness, the tractor derby, a cross between musical flags and a potato race. No clutches were barred, but they might have been burred as the lumbering vehicles touched 35 miles an hour in their crazy bumping dashes. Only 3 starters, with the bloke on the inside hurtling to what might be termed an uncomfortable victory. Max Hicks, tractor champ of the Dust Bowl. Although the first drills were sunk at Kimberley way back in 1919, December 1953 saw the first significant flow in Australia. At Rough Range, about 560 miles north of Perth, in the Carnarvon Basin at Exmouth Gulf. Tests yielded 500 barrels of oil a day, but drilling was suspended while further geophysical surveys were carried out in the surrounding areas. Share values in the West Australian venture jumped from pence to pounds overnight, and fortunes were made and lost in the ensuing weeks as quotes yo-yoed.
There's a lower seller. Is there a Australia seller 6 pounds? Yes. Is there a better seller than 6 pounds?
When the pandemonium quietened, Australia still continued the importation of petroleum at the rate of more than 6 million tons a year. Just as ear-splitting, but of a different type, was the noise at Green Hills Range, when 50-ton Centurion tanks were put through their paces in public for the first time in Australia. These steel monsters, whom many claimed were already obsolete, cost a mere $112,000 each. There was certainly nothing outmoded about these rocket tests, part of a multi-billion-dollar American defense development plan. Cameras played a major role in the study, providing scientists with invaluable material. Jet-powered sleds served the researchers to develop gear for the pilots of supersonic jet planes. The disintegration of a rocket sled in slow motion at 3,000 exposures per second. And watch the left-hand side of your screen to see the shadow of the rocket tube, which is heading straight for the camera. On and on it comes. Wow! And the camera goes on grinding. A typical American town, specially built on Yucca Flats, Nevada, awaiting the latest atom bomb test. Some thousands of troops, defense workers and scientists are to witness the fury of the nuclear blast on the assimilated town. Again, slow motion provides an amazing detailed record of the blast's effect. a giant step in the exploration of nuclear fission. In 1953, a year to remember.